There we go.
All right. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone. I know this is a little bit of an unusual or unexpected setup relative to how you folks in the audience, particularly those on the public side, are more used to things. But today we have a very special joint Kraken with Riel and myself. I, Dave, on my end, am doing a little bit of traveling. As some of you know, definitely the members on patreon.com/Generation Z are aware of that. But we have, of course, today Riel in the driver's seat, if you will. So without further ado, Riel, how you doing today? And we're going to be jumping right into global events and stories.
I'm doing fantastic. Super happy that you're able to join me today, Dave. Yeah, best of luck on all of your travels. I'm humbled to, be taking the driver's seat for today's Kraken. And so for our audience, today's date is August 18th. The focus today is going to be specifically on science and technology and space. We're not going to do any geopolitics. We're not going to do any of the same narrative that, everybody's kind of probably tired of hearing about. Dave and I are going to alternate calling out the stories, and it's going to be entirely science-based. So without further ado, we can get started. And Dave, if you can see my screen, it's all you.
Thank you so much. So first and foremost, we have a mysterious bundle of string on Mars's surface found by the Perseverance rover. Now, again, we see here that NASA's Perseverance rover captured an unusual image of something lying in the red sand of Mars, a bundle of string. Now, I'm going to be completely honest with you folks in the audience, whether you're watching visually or listening or both. I don't say this in an emotional sense, because the last thing I want to do is encourage an emotional form or train of thought relative to how we constantly say on the show to take a step back and think. But I think enough of us, including those in the audience, and Riel as well, if I may speak on behalf of you, have had enough of seeing this, mysterious that. And I don't say that in an emotional, impatient manner, but rather when one delves into the more background, scientific angle of things and notice it's not so black and white as you will, we see here, and I quote, the string could be from the rover or its descent stage, a component similar to a rocket-powered jetpack used to safely lower the rover to the planet's surface, according to a spokesperson for the Perseverance mission at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California. Now, of course, let's not sugarcoat anything here. We've heard all the mysterious, you could say, events, for lack of a better term, surrounding JPL, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Overall, one could argue, is this a deliberate drop feed? Is this a quote unquote influence campaign, shaping operation, you name it, relative to what has already been discovered arguably decades ago behind the scenes? It's hard to say. Ultimately, however, I think it goes without saying that they, and when I mean they, I refer to in this case NASA, the Department of Energy, the military, certain elements of the military industrial complex, are far, far ahead of this than ever done. I mean, than what we're seeing here. I think what we're looking at is precisely a form of drop feeding. Now, I do not want to, there's a difference between, a good friend of mine said this, rationalization and justification. I do not want to justify this article, but from a rational perspective, if we look at all of the lies and the cover-ups allegedly over the past many decades, to me, this speaks to an attempt to, if you will, rewrite history in a certain regard. So that's my personal take on it. But I could be wrong. It may just simply be, sometimes, it may not be a drop feed. It may be something genuinely mysterious, but I put those odds pretty low in my books.
Yeah, totally agree with you, Dave. And you said it well enough. So let's just move on to the next story. At future, in a few articles, it's going to be relevant to what you just said. But moving on to the next story. From Science Daily, one more clue to the moon's origin. From August 10th, researchers discover the first definitive proof that the moon inherited indigenous noble gases from the Earth's mantle. So this article is interesting to me because they talk about one more clue to the moon's origin, but their theory that they're going on is still of the double wham theory that that the Earth was impacted by a meteor, and then the moon is currently a broken off piece from the Earth. But the piece of the article I wanted to headline is from the Grateful Dead lyrics inspire lab instrument. In the Noble Gas Laboratory at ETH Zurich resides a state-of-the-art noble gas mass spectrometer named Tom Dooley, sung about in the Grateful Dead tune by the same name. Now, I'm bringing that up because there's stuff circulating about the Grateful Dead being a part of some sort of like MK Ultra programming. So to just have them mentioned in this article, to me, I find very fascinating. But kind of as Dave prefaced in just the first article, we're kind of tired of almost kind of being like jerked around a little bit. And I find it personally kind of funny that we're still going on this double wham theory. And I kind of am a little bit beyond that. But Dave, if you got anything to say, I'm just ready to move on to the next one.
When we see that scientist that is in search for extraterrestrial noble gas evidence and things like this, with the utmost respect to this particular scientist, I can't help but think, and I do not mean to put this in a conspiratorial manner, but I cannot help but think that this doctor or scientist, relative to the military industrial complex apparatus under the NATO umbrella and European Union, was in fact approached to say, okay, one could in fact come out ever so slightly to the public and will help you by, putting this story in a headline. I'm not saying that is what indeed occurred. I'm just stating that this is where my mind goes, particularly given as we've said, the rumors of these Majestic 12, Zodiac, secret space program, all this kind of stuff. One would think that this is, dare I say, even Nazi vril discoverable elements that has been discovered long ago. Now, to be fair, to play a quick devil's advocate to that, one could say, well, maybe things got so compartmentalized. This is a legitimate study with respects to cutting edge, research. Respectfully, and this is not a jab at this scientist, I would disagree with that. I think, again, what we're seeing is a very, very strong ramp up of presenting to the people, to the masses, a spacefaring industry of sorts, not for better nor worse, but I see this as part of that. So that's my take.
Absolutely. We can move on to the next one here for you.
The next thing is that building on the moon and Mars, you'll need extraterrestrial cement for that. According to Science Daily, researchers are exploring ways to use clay-like topsoil materials from the moon or Mars as the basis for extraterrestrial cement that could be used by astronauts to create building materials for life in outer space. Scientists have converted simulated lunar and Martian soils into geopolymer cement, which is considered a good substitute for conventional cement. Now, again, I say the exact same thing in this regard, particularly if we scroll up a little bit more right back to the headline very quickly. Thank you. Notice the word extraterrestrial, from the concept of psychological dissemination and propagation of certain narratives. We have to keep in mind that just like anything else in life, you have the extremities of either side. And what I mean by that is, in a shaping operation, arguably, the masses have been, we could say, privy to very negative shaping operations in the past. Dare I say, I don't mean to allude to let's all sit by the fire, kumbaya, this is what, we're saved, the allegedly with this whole, the benevolent ETs are here. Let's put all that aside for a moment. Notice the headlines constantly have the word extraterrestrial in them. I can't help but think, when we take a step back and take a non-emotional response and we take time to interpret the data and think, again, it seems to kind of, it's sort of like the same way that it would be claimed that the attempt to dismiss UFO conspiracies would be plastered on tabloids. They would take a real picture of a craft and put it, of a non-human craft, and put it on a tabloid magazine. So by definition, from both a psychological, even an esoteric angle of intent that academic papers are now going public with at certain universities and facilities, you are giving attention to something that is real while choosing to believe that it's fake, while having the thing right in front of you. So when I see the word extraterrestrial, this is where my mind goes personally. If we were to lay out a whole whiteboard of articles where it just said extraterrestrial, we would see a traffic ramp up. We could, dare I say, call this traffic analysis in the intelligence world. We would see a ramp up of the amount of times and frequency the word extraterrestrial is used. As for the cement, this is my opinion. I have no data to go off of this. I think that's very old news, but I hate to keep putting these people down because, again, who am I with no credentials? But thank you, Riel, for letting me jump in.
My pleasure, Dave. It's a lot of fun to listen to you. And absolutely, as you're saying, with the traffic analysis and current mini series that I'm working on is collecting all of the latest UAP extraterrestrial articles and creating a bit of a chronology to help us understand where we're at right now. You hit it right there on the money. That's, when I show my sources, we're going to see exactly what you just said. But on to the next one. Now, this is one of the most insane but hilarious things I've ever seen. Top scientist admits space telescope image was actually a slice of chorizo from CNN. And so that's what I was alluding to, talking about that string picture. A French scientist has apologized after tweeting a photo of a slice of chorizo, claiming it was an image of a distant star taken by the James Webb Space Telescope. Etienne Klein, a celebrated physicist and director at France's Alternative Energies and Atomic Energy Commission, shared the image of the spicy Spanish sausage on Twitter last week, praising the, quote, level of detail it provided. So this is the image right here. Please, Dave. Yes.
This speaks to the ridiculousness of how the masses could be duped. I mean, again, this is why we talk about, particularly on the member side, the idea that we have to remember when we really bring it down and scale it down with respects to the optics of human institutions and governing bodies. They're just groups of humans. So at the end of the day, one human played a trick on a bunch of other ones in this particular case. And again, it was not questioned immediately because this is a highly respected scientist. I don't mean to take that away from them, but notice that when we remove all the labels that we give meaning to via our intent, psychologically and otherwise, they're just humans playing tricks on other humans. So who's to say this couldn't be the case in a deliberate fashion, in a grander scale, in another time period? If you see what I'm alluding to. So I'll leave that there.
And the physicist apparently says that it was a deliberate hoax with the intention to urge caution regarding images that seem to speak for themselves, which, you know, all those people that are skeptical of images that NASA releases and all that, it's like, oh, well, this is interesting. People got duped. And now we have to question, like, what did the James Webb Telescope release at the White House, those official images and stuff like that?
This goes right back to, again, the concept of you can't have your cake and eat it too. You have a scientist here, highly respected around the world, arguably, stating to always question everything. And then you have other institutions in this regard and in other regards saying, trust us, we know what we're doing. Again, this is why I always say on Gen Z here, we do our best to ensure that we don't tell you what to think, but rather just take a step back and look and decide for yourselves, literally, without sarcasm. There's a difference between provoking a narrative and then saying, oh, we're just looking at every side, I got nothing to do with it. And then there's a difference between that and actually saying, here's the data in as neutral a way as we can report it, choose, or whatever, do make of it as you see fit. So yes.
Absolutely, Dave. And that's one of the things that I fell in love with when I started to follow along with your channel. And now here I am doing the report alongside you, doing my best to objectively analyze and just present the data so that our audience can make the decisions for themselves. But let's move on to the next one. This is all you here.
So according to scitechdaily.com, the headline reads, surprise, surprise, subsurface water on Mars defies expectations. Well, again, I don't mean to sound like a broken record here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up what we see in this subtitle, physics connect seismic data to properties of rocks and sediments. Well, again, I would very respectfully urge those to check out the plasma physicist based out of Texas, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. John Brandenburg. And he was the one who put out a paper, a handful of, I think 2017, 2018, give or take, that, or maybe even earlier, that he found deliberate evidence of ancient nuclear war on Mars, was laughed at, dismissed. And then I believe, I don't mean to misquote or mischaracterize, but the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, then backed him, and he was less laughed at after he received backing in that regard. So presuming I have the context correct, that's where I stand on this. Nothing surprises me in this regard. Again, this speaks to that concept of, to what extent is this a potentially benevolent shaping operation? To what extent does this speak to various factions behind the scenes attempting to rewrite history? And if so, for better or worse, and in what context? These are all the questions I constantly go about in my own head as well. I don't claim to have the answers. I think this is the path to pursue, though.
Right on. And yes, I have listened to Brandenburg on the program Earth Ancients, and that's where they look into the remnants of certain radioactive isotopes on Mars, and they have discovered that there were nuclear explosions. That's pretty much definitively what they've concluded. But interesting, before we just move on here, this article quoting the co-author of this study from University of California, Berkeley, they're saying there is some cement, but the rocks are not full of cement. Talking about water and rocks, which goes to that previous article we looked at where they're talking about new cement that you need to build stuff on Mars. So just kind of having the same tangential train of thought with the articles we're going through, so that we're connecting dots through the classic open source intelligence kind of way.
Right.
Now, on to the next one. The future of science in Canada is at risk. Researchers call for a pay raise. This is from August 11th, CTV News. So this article is from the Canadian Press and talking about the lack of money that scientists are making. So, for example, it quotes, "The 27-year-old has always dreamt of being a scientist. After a decade in university, she's nearly finished her PhD and has amassed around $100,000 in student debt. Funding for research students in Canada comes mainly through scholarships and fellowships that the three federal granting agencies, the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council, and the Canadian Institute of Health Research." And I just wanted to bring this up, that the scientific community feel like they're not making enough money, which is probably true. But to report on this after we see a scientist deliberately using a photo of a chorizo to trick people is kind of like, just, trust the science, right? But unless you
Well,
got something, feel free to
my
chime in.
my whole thing here is I do not mean to discourage anyone from going into the academic system relative to what you want to pursue. If it's something that is, unfortunately only the universities teach. We've talked about on our Patreon Zoom calls with our members that I had brought up the other day, actually, as of the day we're recording this. If I were to, be in charge of a country, a nation, a planet, you name it, and I had the ability to revamp the education system, it is of my humble perspective, I would, right from when the kids enter school, I would start them with the arts and let them be free, and then let them see where they go in terms of what they want to pursue, whether it's a path that leans more towards science, philosophy, you name it, building things with their hands, or maybe some are better at theoretical visual. Again, we need every angle to put together. We need the theoretical models to suture, and then we need the practical minds to apply it to applications, so that we can then go from theoretical to commercial to the consumer. It doesn't have to be in that order. But again, I think what we're seeing here in this article relative to the description of student debt, sadly, I don't want to say this, but sadly to me, it speaks to how the school system, maybe at one point, but over time has been sutured and squeezed, so that it's not even about school anymore. It's just about milking the students and the students' parents for the money. That's where I see this, but that's just me. I could be wrong.
I'm going to agree with you pretty much wholeheartedly, and just add on that it would be great if the education system taught kids how to develop their intuition and follow their heart and learn more about spiritual based practices, instead of going right into the heavy academia sciences kind of based things. But on to the next one. This is all you here.
So according to scitechdaily.com, research fraud. Is everything we think we know about Alzheimer's disease wrong? I mean, for example, we saw recently that there was a research paper conducted extensively pertaining to the whole, again, serotonin and antidepressants, which I must admit we have to be consistent with respects to admitting when we're wrong or right. I myself laughed at Tom Cruise back in 2005 with that Matt Lauer interview, and I must admit now that, my gosh, turns out he was right in that particular context. That doesn't mean that would apply to everything else Mr. Cruise states and does, but we must admit and be consistent from a non-emotional point of view. Turns out that may in fact be the case. Now, in this regard, I don't see this much different from that. That's where I stand on this. When I see that we see first a much anticipated new drug called Aduhelm got approval from the FDA, but its actual benefit for Alzheimer's was so small that insurance won't cover it for most patients. We see then on top of this, a major scandal broke. New evidence was revealed that researchers had faked images in an Alzheimer's study published 16 years ago. This was a high impact paper that other researchers had trusted and relied on as they did their own work. So again, for those to say that, the FDA is not compromised, respectfully, I'd say think again. So believe me, when in my humble perspective, folks, when I say that, for those that say, oh, well, those are the mistakes of decades ago, that wouldn't happen now. That's the time old shtick, in my opinion. That's the time old shtick. So
absolutely. And like, just again, another article about, fraud in the scientific community and duping others. And you with this as an example, we can see how one like philosophy or train of thought can compound, and decades later, you based all of your life research on one idea that turns out was wrong. And then that whole field Yeah.
Right. And if I may, one more thing before we move on. If you look, folks, at, for example, CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, they bring on these research professionals or these analyst professionals. What does that even mean? The whole thing is, in my opinion, ridiculous. And yes, in this particular context, I am taking a jab at those people that come on because they get paid six figures in many cases to come on and just read off of a script or a teleprompter relative to encouraging the financial aspect that is driving the shaping narratives in a malevolent sense, arguably, within the STEM community, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. Because ultimately, what I would say to people to finish this story off is anything that gets attacked scientifically, do not agree nor disagree. I would say question in regards to is the person who's making this claim being attacked, or are their findings being disproven? There's a difference. There's a difference. There are many scientists that have been attacked. For example, Mr. Santilli, the Santilli telescope. I'm not going to give my opinion here on that because that's not the point, but his method for how he developed the telescope and so on and so forth, to my knowledge, was not disproven, but rather he was attacked. So he was attacked. If they can't assassinate you literally, in my opinion, they'll do everything they can to assassinate your character. So that's just my take.
Very good distinction to know about the character versus the actual content. Very important.
Well, if they say, well, you're wrong, this experiment will never work, get out of my, get out of my face, then that's attacking the character. Right? Or for example, if they say, well, we tried the experiment in our lab and it didn't work. No. I want to see the original experiment that the initial scientist claimed worked. Then we go from there. None of this, well, we tried it, none of that. I want to see the guy's lab the original paper, not what people wrote about the paper, the original paper, all of that stuff.
Absolutely. We definitely do not go directly to the source, and we often rely too much on what the news is reporting and how they interpret it and spin the original content.
And all you got to do is slap an institution's name on that paper saying this institution backs it, and no one's going to question it after that. So that's just that's my take. Is this is your story or mine?
And I'm going to do the next two because they're connected, and then you get the next fun one. This one from CTV News: exposure to synthetic forever chemical linked to liver cancer. Study finds man-made chemicals found in industrial products, commonly referred to as forever chemicals, have been linked to the most common type of liver cancer. A new study has found, and they're called polyfluoroalkyl substances, PFAS, forever chemicals. So,
Polyfluoroalkyl, I think.
Right on. You are the more scientific one of the two of us. But yeah, so that's just bringing that to our attention here, because they've been gathering data from human blood and tissue samples in specifically Los Angeles and Hawaii. And yeah, this is a very interesting one when you talk about climate change and pollution and all that. And even if I'm going to disagree with a lot of the science behind the climate change narrative, well, clearly there's not good shit in the sky and in the air that we're breathing. I am not going to argue with that. So I would like us to be more respectful to what we breathe in, obviously. But and I mean, we can go on to the next one here. Cognitive decline linked to ultra processed food, study finds. I mean, we really don't need to go deeper into this one.
I'm shocked. I can't.
Yeah, exactly.
When I saw this headline, I almost said, "Stop the episode right now." I can't do this.
Yeah. So just, this is just in the mainstream news. So maybe this will help people improve their diet a little bit, especially when, inflation is so high and the right price of food. Maybe you won't spend $8 on a hot dog next time you go out. But so on to the next one here, which is for you, buddy.
CTV News, we see here that fossil discovery suggests the Loch Ness monster may have once existed. Again, we see, for example, there have been at this point, I'm just gonna voice record what I said the first 10 minutes of this episode and press play on repeat. I'm joking, but we see here the scientists from the University of Bath and University of Portsmouth in the UK, as well as the Université Hassan II in Morocco, published a study last week in the journal Cretaceous Research on the discovery of small plesiosaurus from a 100 million-year-old river system now part of the Sahara. According to the study, plesiosauruses were long-necked marine reptiles with small heads and 4 long flippers that existed during the time of the dinosaurs. They also served as inspiration for the Loch Ness monster in Scotland. Again, if we scroll down a little bit more, we'll find that there actually have been photographs taken, albeit I will admit, covered up. If we scroll down a little more, if we keep going a little more, I think I saw a photo earlier. This right over here, this undated file photo shows a shadowy shape that some people say is the Loch Ness monster in Scotland. Now, again, not claiming that it is. This speaks to the idea of, I'm not trying to say everything we're told was a lie, or everything that we're told is nonsense is now being flipped. What I'm saying is we should question right from the get-go with respects to, let's do our own research amongst a variety of different sources, global sources, not just national sources, but global, and not just global, but even dive into that other area of not so, we could say, honestly, I would even say, just you look at academic papers and you see things like this are not that far off. Far off. I think this is old stuff, decades old, but we see, with RNA manipulation. I want to be clear for YouTube here. I'm not speaking about the beep boop. I'm just talking about with regards to epigenetics and eugenics and all of that. This is not that far out there. And I quote, it's a bit controversial, but who's to say that because we paleontologists have always called them marine reptiles, they had to live in the sea? Lots of marine lineages invaded fresh water, end quote. Again, this speaks to this idea of who is to say. Very simply, even myself. One could play devil's advocate to what I'm saying to you folks in the audience right now. You could say, Dave, who are you to make that opinion? And I would say fair point. So at the end of the day, this is the type of, I think, discourse that is much more healthily applied to a larger subset of individuals in a community that allow for more of a progression in academia than anything else. So,
yeah, and I just wanted to add on that the whole dinosaur narrative, I find it very peculiar that we have this nice number of 66 million years ago when they went extinct. And I can't help but think of the gematria, the numerology, the
right.
deep cryptocracy kind of inner behind the scene workings of these stories and what we're told. It's like, again, just what a nice number, 66 million years ago.
Right.
Okay, so on to the next one, actually. It didn't take long for Meta's new chatbot to say something offensive. Meta's new chatbot can convincingly mimic how humans speak on the internet, for better and worse. In conversations with CNN Business this week, the chatbot, which was released publicly Friday and has been dubbed BlenderBot 3, said it identifies as alive and human, watches anime, and has an Asian wife. It also falsely claimed that Donald Trump is still president and that there is definitely a lot of evidence that the election was stolen. This is from August 11th. Reading this, it's like, whoa, okay. Dave, feel free to chime in because
with respect to I'm not laughing for or against the election stolen angle of it. With respects to that, I want to kind of leave the politics aside when analyzing this in this video today. But if this doesn't speak to how AI can, big picture, in my opinion, we see, for example, we are a species on the surface of this planet as human beings where our culture or the technology being developed is moving faster than the culture in which we are psychologically and, dare I say, spiritually in tune with. We are completely falling out of line with respects to what's going on. We see people doing quick gotcha attacks, emotional attacks on Twitter, for example. Well, whataboutisms, as they call it. As a good friend of mine said, that's an exhibiting trait of narcissism. We see, for example, that the legacy media or for-profit media seems to be pushing this angle of, again, not taking the time to think and just going jab, what about? So when we see, for example, for what you highlighted here, Riel, so graciously, BlenderBot self-identified as sentient during chats with CNN Business, likely because that's what the human response it studied said. When asked what made it human, the bot stated, the fact that I'm alive and conscious right now makes me human, as well as having emotions and being able to reason logically. I don't particularly, I would personally, for those that want to get my opinion, I don't necessarily agree with that with respects to the idea of quote unquote organic consciousness. Again, consciousness means something different to an ontologist, a philosopher, to again, a eugenicist. It means different things depending on where you go. A neurologist, a biochemist, all of this. So when I look at this, even a physicist, dare I say, even a computer scientist as well. So when I look at all of this, what I see is the unfortunate and possibly malevolently or deliberate speeding up of the technology compared to the culture. We should not have a lot of access to a lot of the things that we do, in my opinion, on a public level. And very quickly, to play devil's advocate to that, the question becomes, so who should? And that's a very tough question. I don't claim to have the answer to. That's just my take on, in terms of the culture the technology is moving faster than the culture. So it's like giving ants bazookas. That's my whole thing. So
right on. Dave, I really appreciate your wisdom and insight on all of this. It's so fascinating to see how much you've grown since going back to the earliest videos that you were making 2 years ago.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. So we've only got 2 more articles because I know this is a shorter episode. We got to wrap up. So this one's on you.
The Arctic is warming, according to CTV News, is warming at nearly double the rate previously estimated, according to a study. New researchers suggest that the Arctic is warming alarmingly faster than what current scientific literature and media sources have reported. Again, we see here that a report based in December 2021 by the US-based National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, confirmed this rate. Again, NOAA, the NRO, we see, for example, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency that Riel, you were delving into a handful of months ago, and we looked into on the Patreon side. We see, for example, the same agencies that, interestingly enough, give trouble with obfuscation and delays and all of that with Freedom of Information Act, FOIA requests, are the same ones stating this is occurring. Now, I'm not trying to imply they're lying, nor am I trying to imply they're telling the truth. What I'm simply trying to imply is that there is a there with respect to the poles allegedly flipping or turning, the planet, quote unquote, flushing itself out every 12 to 13,000 years. I would dare to say, in my humble opinion, this is not anything conspiratorial whatsoever. As a matter of fact, these articles are the result of an attempt for a handful of humans at the top to disseminate this to us without trying to freak us out. Now, my whole thing, I don't agree with that, because my whole thing is simply come out and tell us. If you don't lie to the people from the beginning, you're never going to have an issue. That's a whole other conversation. But ultimately, I think this is what we're seeing. I think I mean, yeah, I think the polls are definitely going to shift in the coming years. I don't mean to fearmonger, and I think this is a drop feed of that. So
that is very interesting that is your thought, because actually, I'm just going to give our audience a sneak peek. Today's episode of our Scientific Kraken is actually, this was a very soft version of what we're doing. And next time we do the Joint Kraken, I've got a whole slew of articles that we're going to go a lot deeper into the very nerdy terminology and scientific stuff that we love that Dave does. And one of the articles is actually that the Earth's magnetic poles are not likely to flip.
well,
Latest scientific study. So I'm not saying that
they're not likely to flip if one is too busy inside the metaverse. Sure. In what context? And I'm just half joking, half serious. But ultimately, I think that again, this whole concept of the poles are not likely to flip. Well, this speaks to, on a more serious note, okay, you can't have your cake and eat it too, on both ends of the stick. You can't control both ends and then say, okay, it's neither but both. It's like that is in my opinion, the pure definition of, dare I say, propaganda in this context. So that's just me, though.
Yeah, absolutely, Dave. And so the last article, the last scientific thing that we're going to be looking at today is freshly published open letter, a World Climate Declaration saying there is no climate emergency. Now, this is obviously a very controversial paper. It was actually published June 27th, 2022, and it is signed by 1,107 scientists and professionals from all over the world. And this is a 20-something page document, but most of the document is just the signatures. It actually doesn't really say much other than what we're going to cover here, which they're saying climate science should be less political, while climate policies should be more scientific. Scientists should openly address uncertainties and exaggerations in their predictions of global warming, while politicians should dispassionately account the real costs as well as the imagined benefits of their policy measures. So they say that it's natural as well as anthropogenic factors that cause warming. Warming is far slower than predicted. The climate policy relies on inadequate models. CO2 is plant food, the basis of all life, which they try to say get rid of all carbon, carbon zero. Well, these scientists seem to disagree with that, saying it's the basis of all life. Global warming has not increased natural disasters, and climate policy must respect scientific and economic realities. So, just to wrap it up here, their advice to the European leaders is that science should strive for a significantly better understanding of the climate system, while politics should focus on minimizing potential climate damage by prioritizing adaptation strategies based on proven and affordable technologies.
This basically is saying that, in my opinion, this speaks to just like there is a very, again, this is not something that is not discussed in the media because the media is a direct tool or arm of this, particularly the for-profit legacy media, in my opinion, just my opinion. But we find, for example, that, again, I can't help but think of, for example, the Great Barrington Declaration and all of this.
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
don't mean to, and what I'm saying here is I'm not anti-climate change nor pro-climate change, nor just like with the Great Barrington, I'm not pro nor anti-beep boop. What I'm saying here is that how come those that disagree with the legacy narrative are immediately dismissed as, heretics, fringe thinkers, you name it? Does this letter here, for example, does this not speak to healthy conversation of opposing viewpoints? And this arguably, to add to that, to finally to wrap this up, this speaks to the clear issue between policymakers, the intelligence world, and the scientific world. Those three things are constantly in flux and not in an organic, chronological way that I think benefits the masses whatsoever. So what we're seeing is the separation of these different entities, but then the intertwinement of them the second it gets political and the human angle wants to push a particular narrative. Hence, going back to what we said earlier about shaping operations sadly being malevolent for many, many decades. So that's where I go when I look at that.
Excellent, Dave. Yep, I totally agree. And I think that's a perfect note for us to end this episode on. So there you have it, folks. This is a science and technology based Kraken, the first time that we've done this, but definitely won't be the last. And if you got any closing remarks, the floor is yours, Dave.
I just want to thank everyone for tuning in, whether it's on audio, video, and I want to thank everyone for the compliments with respects to how Riel and I do these deep dives every week or every other week. And so we really appreciate it. We're going to do our best to ramp that up a little more often and do some more of these, not just joint Krakens, but also deep dives that we may in fact have as, a separate series or something like this. So stay tuned, folks, and thank you so very much.